This is Customs Inspector Raymond Hollis, Port of Seattle, Marine Division. I'm documenting what happened with Container 7-4, Delta 14. The Maritime Manifest says this is routine. The Port Authority says I'm being paranoid. But something in that container isn't routine, and I've been doing this job for 32 years, long enough to know the difference between paranoia and instinct. I've never heard containers hiss before. The morning was standard. Tuesday, October 8th. 0600 hours, my shift started at the South Terminal. Container 7-4 Delta 14 arrived on the MV Pacific Endeavor, inbound from Busan via Shanghai. The manifest listed it as agricultural equipment, replacement parts for combine harvesters, irrigation systems, standard industrial goods that flow through here daily. 40 feet, refrigerated unit, temperature locked at 4 degrees Celsius according to the seal documentation. Routine paperwork, routine processing, the kind of container you stamp and move to the next one. Except the seal looked wrong. I've inspected thousands of containers across 3 decades. You develop a sense for it. The seals are supposed to be uniform, plastic and metal tamper-evident devices that show any breach with obvious visual damage. This one had scratches around the lock mechanism, fine scratches, like something had clawed at it from inside. Not rough damage from external handling. Deliberate, incremental, like something had been working at the seal from the interior for days. When I pressed my hand against the container door, I felt vibration. Not engine vibration from the crane. Not port machinery hum. Something rhythmic underneath the ambient noise. Something that felt almost like breathing. Slow, deliberate, alive. Container looks fine to me, Donnie Keys said. He's one of the dock crew supervisors, been here almost as long as I have. But he wasn't looking at the seal. He was looking at his phone. Everyone on the dock was. Something about a software alert, some shipping logistics update that required immediate attention. Nobody was looking at the physical cargo anymore. That's how the port works now. Everything's in the system, and the system is always more reliable than your eyes. I should have let it go. Should have stamped the manifest and moved to Container 15. Should have stayed within protocol and deferred to the authority hierarchy. But those scratches bothered me. The vibration bothered me. Something in my nervous system was sending warning signals that 32 years of experience had trained me to recognize. So I called for the portable diagnostic equipment, the thermal imaging unit they use to spot water intrusion and temperature excursions in refrigerated containers. Company policy says you scan any container that seems anomalous. The scratches qualified. The vibration qualified. Within protocol, within procedure. The thermal image came back wrong. Not wrong in an equipment malfunction way. Not wrong in a way that suggested simple mechanical failure. Wrong in a way that suggested organized biological activity. The standard refrigerated container should show uniform cold across the interior. That flat, consistent thermal signature of climate-controlled space. This one showed hot spots. Multiple hot spots arranged in what looked almost like a deliberate pattern. Concentric rings. Like something was organized inside, or had organized itself deliberately, creating thermal variation that didn't match any shipping accident I'd ever seen. I radioed the Port Authority. Container 7-4, Delta 14 shows internal thermal anomaly. Recommend inspection before unloading to dock storage. Thermal imaging indicates active heat sources, non-uniform distribution. The response came back immediate and dismissive. Hollis, process it through. We're running 3 hours behind schedule already. Thermal variance likely indicates ice accumulation or coolant circulation problem. Standard procedure. Mark and move. That's when I heard the sound that still plays in my head when I try to sleep. A wet, sliding noise. Something organic moving against metal. Inside the container. The sound of pressure trying to escape. The sound of something contained, but not inactive. I was still holding the thermal imaging device. The readout was flickering. The hot spots were moving, relocating, reorganizing. I'm going to do a partial inspection, I said into the radio. Visual through the vents before we move it to storage. Donnie looked up from his phone finally. Frustrated. Look, Ray. I get it. You're thorough. That's good. But we've got 20 containers behind this one, and the cranes are already pre-positioned for the next cycle. The shipper documentation is clean. Manifest is clean. The seal's intact. The seal scratched from inside, I wanted to say. But I knew how that would sound. Paranoid. Inefficient. Slowing down port operations on a hunch. Port politics meant the authority always deferred to schedule over caution. It always had. Even in 2008, when we had the scare with the falsified pharmaceutical shipments that almost got through. Even in 2015, when somebody tried to smuggle reptile parts in what was listed as office furniture. The authority cared about cargo throughput first, safety second, and detailed investigation, maybe somewhere further down the list. But I had 32 years invested in this job. 32 years of paperwork and routine, and performing the role of responsible civil servant. And now something was wrong, and I could feel it in the vibration against my palm, in the thermal signature that didn't match any legitimate cargo. I walked to the ventilation port on the side of the container. The metal was warm, actually warm to touch. Not the residual heat of a sunny day on steel. Active heat, biological heat. I brought my eye level with the vent opening and activated my professional-grade flashlight. The interior was dark. Refrigerated units keep cargo cool and invisible. You can't see through 30 feet of darkness and climate-controlled mist. But my flashlight beam cut through, creating a narrow corridor of visibility into the container's sealed space. What I saw lasted about 2 seconds before I pulled back. 2 seconds that were too long. Long enough to understand I was looking at something that shouldn't be in a sealed container crossing international waters. Long enough to understand that agricultural equipment was a lie on the manifest. Long enough to understand that something had gone very wrong in the shipping chain. The interior of the container was approximately 30 to 40% full. Not with combine harvester parts. Not with irrigation components. With tissue. Living tissue. The kind of organic mass that shouldn't exist in that context. It was pale, almost translucent, and it glistened with moisture like it was actively metabolizing. The tissue seemed to cover the floor and extend partway up the walls, arranged in a pattern that looked almost deliberate. Almost architectural, like it was organizing itself. Growing. Consolidating. As my flashlight beam moved across it, the tissue moved. Not much. Just a shift. A reorientation toward the light source. Like something recognizing illumination and adjusting for it. Like something aware. I pulled back from the vent immediately. My hand was shaking. My heart rate was somewhere past 120. I could feel adrenaline flooding my system, my body recognizing threat even before my rational mind could categorize what I'd seen. "Donnie," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need you to call the health authority. Not routine. Priority alert. Container 14. "For what?" Donnie had his phone in his pocket now. He looked genuinely annoyed, like I was the problem. Like my caution was an impediment to his day's schedule. "Ray, if this is about some ice buildup or a coolant leak, we can address that at the storage facility. We don't need to halt operations. Not ice. Not coolant. Just call them. Tell them Container 14 needs health and safety clearance before unloading. Full biohazard protocol. And Donnie, tell them it's urgent." I didn't explain what I'd seen. Couldn't explain it without sounding insane. Tissue. Alive tissue. Arranged deliberately. In a container that was supposed to contain irrigation equipment. The words would have sounded like conspiracy theory. Like paranoia. Like the rambling of a long-time inspector whose perception had finally crossed from thorough into pathological. Donnie made the call, mostly because I was his peer and I was explicitly asking. The Port Authority response came back 15 minutes later. They'd send someone from the health authority to do a preliminary assessment. No full biohazard team. That would be overkill, they said. But someone from the health authority would look at it and provide documentation. That someone was Dr. Evelyn Voss. She arrived in a Port Authority vehicle at 0730 hours, carrying a small sample collection kit and looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. She was the port's contract medical inspector, basically on call for health questions, usually dealing with crew illnesses or food safety issues from the restaurant supply containers. Straightforward work. Predictable work. Until today. I briefed her on what I'd seen. She listened with the same expression Donnie had shown, professional patience mixed with underlying skepticism, like she was hearing from someone whose judgment might be questionable. "Biological tissue," she repeated back to me. "In a cargo container. From Shanghai." "Yes. I'm certain of it. Whatever's in there is alive." It moved when I illuminated it with the flashlight. The thermal imaging showed active heat sources. The container was vibrating before that, and there are scratches on the seal from the inside. Dr. Voss was maybe 50, with the posture of someone who'd spent her career being told she was overreacting to biological concerns. She set down her kit and walked to the vent opening I'd been staring at minutes before. "Can I borrow your flashlight?" I handed it over. She looked inside, for maybe 5 seconds, longer than I'd managed to look. Then she pulled back, and I saw something change in her face. The skepticism was gone, replaced by something else, professional certainty, and genuine fear underneath it. "We need to quarantine this container immediately," she said. Her voice had changed too, tighter, more urgent. "Full biohazard team, respiratory protection, and we need to run diagnostics on anyone who's been in contact with the exterior of this unit." "What is it?" I asked. "I don't know yet, but it's definitely biological. It's definitely organized, and it's definitely not on any import manifest I've ever seen." She was already on her phone. "Yes, Protocol 7 at the South Terminal. Container 7-4, Delta 14. Priority medical alert. I'm classifying this as potential biohazard category 3 pending full analysis." Things moved faster after that, but not fast enough. The biohazard team arrived by 0800 hours. Full protective suits, respiratory apparatus, portable isolation barriers. They set up a perimeter around Container 14, and the Port Authority started diverting dock operations away from that sector. Dock workers were told to find other assignments. Nobody was to approach the container without full protection. By then I'd already made my critical mistake. I realized it too late, after the contamination had already taken place. The moment I'd put my eye to that vent opening, I'd been exposed. Not catastrophically exposed. The vent was small, the opening just an inch or so in diameter. But enough. Enough for microscopic particles to escape. Enough for whatever organism was in that container to have detected the opening, shifted itself toward the light, and expelled spores or particles, or whatever it used for transmission. The biohazard team did a preliminary sweep with their biological particulate detector, and it registered positive in my immediate vicinity. Elevated background readings. Microscopic particles in the air around where I'd been standing. The kind of exposure that protocol demanded immediate baseline testing for. Dr. Voss told me at 0845, "We need to bring you in for baseline testing. It's probably minimal exposure. You weren't in there long, and the vent opening is small. But protocol requires documentation. Standard procedure for potential biohazard contact." I went with them to the medical facility at the terminal, a small clinic used mostly for crew health emergencies and accident triage. They ran the basics: blood pressure, blood oxygen, white cell count. Standard diagnostic work. Then Dr. Voss took a sample, throat swab, careful and deliberate, the kind that suggests she was already starting to worry about airborne transmission. "We'll run this against the genomic database," she said. "See if we can identify what we're dealing with. Cross-reference against known pathogens. In the meantime, you're on paid administrative leave from the Port Authority until we clear you. Standard procedure." "How long?" I asked. "Best case? 48 hours and you're back to work. If it's nothing, if there's no exposure, no infection, no biological markers that suggest contamination." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "If it's something, we'll need to monitor progression. And quarantine. Progression. That word should have alarmed me more than it did. But I felt fine. No symptoms. No fever, no respiratory distress, no anything unusual. Just the vague unease of being told you might be infected with something unknown. The dock workers were dramatically less lucky. I found out about them around 1,100 hours. The radio traffic on the Port Authority channel became frantic, overlapping voices, medical alerts, someone requesting immediate ambulance dispatched to the South Terminal. I was sitting in the clinic's break room, drinking bad coffee, and trying to redirect my thoughts away from what I'd seen in that container, when Dr. Voss came in with her tablet displaying preliminary findings. "We have a situation," she said. 3 dock workers who were in proximity to Container 14 before the quarantine was established. Approximately 50 feet away during offloading preparation. They're reporting respiratory distress. We're doing preliminary assessment now." "What kind of respiratory distress?" I asked. "Asthma? Panic response? What are the symptoms?" "Crystalline sensation in the lungs, according to their reports. They describe it like breathing in something sharp. One of them, Jericho Reeves, senior dock supervisor, says it sounds like he's got gravel in his airways. Another describes it as ice fragments. The third reports similar symptoms, but claims the sensation is moving, traveling through his respiratory tract. She was scrolling through something on her tablet. Her jaw was tighter than it had been before. This is consistent with... She stopped, looked at me directly. The kind of look that meant she was making a decision about what to tell me and what to hold back. Consistent with what? I pressed. Consistent with acute exposure to a pathogenic agent. Airborne transmission. Stage 1 symptom progression based on models from other aerosol-transmitted pathogens. She sat down across from me. Mr. Hollis, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you can handle directness. I don't know what was in that container, but whatever it is, it's biological, it's transmissible through respiratory route, and it progresses. The dock workers who came within 15 feet of container 14 before the quarantine showed symptoms within 90 minutes of exposure. That's a fast infection vector. I could feel my hands shaking again, my breathing getting shallow, which made me immediately start worrying I was already symptomatic myself. How long from stage 1 to stage 2? I asked. And how many stages are there? I don't know. I don't even know what the stages are yet. I'm trying to run comparative analysis with known pathogens, but nothing in the database is matching the preliminary biological markers we're finding. The samples we took from the container interior show cellular organization that doesn't match any cataloged human pathogen. It's almost like the tissue is a hybrid, partly organic organism, partly something else, something engineered, or something that evolved in an environment we don't understand. The radio crackled with urgent traffic. A medical team requesting transport for dock worker Jericho Reeves to the quarantine ward. Respiratory failure status unknown. Progression to stage 2 confirmed. Dr. Voss and I went to the quarantine ward together. It was just a regular hospital ward that they'd converted into an isolation zone. Room sealed off with plastic sheeting, negative pressure system running, medical personnel in full biohazard suits moving between stations. Through the observation window, I could see 3 people in isolation beds. 2 of them were sitting up, breathing visibly through oxygen masks. One of them was lying back, and I could see the crystalline patterns on his skin. Thin lines, like frost forming on a window, running up his neck, across his visible arm, spreading across his chest. That was Jericho Reeves, one of the guys I'd seen that morning, joking with Donnie about the shipping software alert while I was calling in container 14. Now he was covered in something that looked almost like ice but moved slightly when the light hit it. Responsive ice. Alive ice. Crystalline structures that were organizing themselves on his skin. The crystalline formations are the pathogen itself, Dr. Voss said quietly. Not a symptom of infection. The actual organism. It's aerosol transmitted, infiltrates the respiratory tract, and then undergoes some kind of crystalline transformation within the host tissue. It's parasitic, but not in the traditional sense. The host remains alive, but the organism is replacing cellular structure progressively, converting it into something else. Converting it into what? I asked. A weapon? A new organism? What's the end point of that conversion? That's the question I can't answer yet. She was making notes on her tablet, her hands moving quickly. We need to talk to your port authority about the container's origin, where it came from, who packed it, what the actual contents were supposed to be, according to any documentation the shipper might have provided, because a container full of combined harvester parts does not contain living, transforming tissue. That's when Gerald Wickham, the Port Authority director, arrived at the quarantine ward. He was 50s, career administrator, the kind of guy who cared more about regulatory compliance and schedule maintenance than about dock workers getting infected with unknown pathogens. He looked at the patients through the observation window, and then looked at Dr. Voss with something approaching blame in his expression. How many people know about this? He asked. 3 in quarantine now. Possibly Customs Inspector Hollis here. Medical staff handling the cases. Biohazard team members. We're at 14 people minimum who have direct knowledge. We need to contain the information until we have better clarity, Wickham said. The shipping industry will panic. Port operations could face months of delays. Insurance companies will get involved. We need to have concrete answers before this becomes public. Dr. Voss stared at him. We do have an outbreak. 3 people are infected with an unknown pathogen that's showing rapid progression and clear signs of biological transformation. We need to alert the health department immediately, initiate federal quarantine protocols, and trace the container's origin to understand what we're dealing with. We will, Wickham said, but carefully. tactfully. We're not announcing pandemic emergency until we have concrete data to back up the announcement. I watched them argue, and I listened to the monitors behind me, the ones tracking Jericho Reeves and the other infected workers. The sound of their breathing, the mechanical beeping of the equipment, the occasional rustling as they shifted position in their beds. That's when I realized I should have been more scared than I was. But instead, I was curious. Which was worse? The next 24 hours moved in a strange, escalating pattern. The health authority arrived, federal level, not just state or local. They took samples from the 3 infected dock workers. They traced Container 14's origin to a facility in Shanghai. They started trying to reach the shipper, the transport company, anyone in the supply chain, and the infected got worse. Much worse. Jericho Reeves stopped responding coherently by 1600 hours on what they were calling day 1 of the outbreak. The crystalline patterns had spread across his body, neck, shoulders, visible portions of his arms and chest. But he wasn't in pain, as far as anyone could tell. His vital signs were stable. His breathing was regular. He just wasn't there mentally. The nurses said he seemed to be looking at something they couldn't see, listening to something they couldn't hear. The other 2 dock workers showed the same progression, but offset by about 45 minutes each, like they were on slightly different infection timelines based on exposure duration. The one with less exposure was in stage 2, but still somewhat responsive. The one with more exposure, one of the senior crew leads named Garrett Whitmore, older guy, been working docks for 34 years, was already showing the initial signs of stage 3. The crystalline patterns were starting to merge, consolidating, creating larger geometric structures across his skin. Dr. Voss brought me a preliminary report at 1900 hours. She looked like she'd been running on coffee and adrenaline and the kind of focused intensity that comes from confronting something that doesn't fit into any known category. The organism, she said, sitting down in the clinic's break room with me. It's not a virus, not a bacteria, not a fungus, not a prion. It's something new, something that doesn't fit into standard taxonomic categories. The genomic analysis suggests it's been engineered, deliberately created, or evolved in some environment we don't understand. What do you mean engineered? I asked. The cellular structure shows markers that shouldn't exist in natural organisms. Prion-like elements mixed with viral replication patterns, mixed with something that looks almost crystalline at the molecular level. It's like someone took multiple biological systems and combined them deliberately, or like they evolved naturally in an extreme environment, extreme pressure, extreme temperature, conditions we've never modeled in laboratory settings. She paused. There's one more thing. The crystalline structures at the molecular level, they're organizing themselves, creating a network, a lattice, like the organism isn't just infecting the host. It's building infrastructure inside them. I could feel my throat getting tighter. Am I infected? We don't know yet. The baseline test shows elevated white cell activity in your system, but nothing diagnostic. No crystalline formation. Your vital signs are normal. Your blood work is normal. But the infection vector seems to have multiple stages of development. You might be asymptomatic. You might be in pre-symptomatic. Or you might be one of the people who just gets exposed and never develops active pathology. And if I am infected, how long from stage 1 to stage 4? Dr. Voss took a long breath. Jericho Reeves went from first symptoms to stage 3 in about 8 hours. If there's a stage 4, if this progresses the way other infectious diseases do, we're looking at complete biological transformation within 12 to 24 hours. Maybe less, maybe more. I don't have comparison data. Complete biological transformation. That's what she said. Not death, not illness. Transformation. Conversion from human to something else. Something organized. Something crystalline. Something that thought in geometries instead of languages. But Garrett, the senior crew lead who'd been on the docks for longer than I'd been working in customs, he stayed conscious longer than the others. At 2,200 hours, the medical team let me approach his isolation room in full biohazard protection. I asked Dr. Voss why she wanted me in there specifically. She said, he's asking for someone who was at the port, someone who saw the container before we sealed it. I think he wants to explain something to someone who understands the context. Garrett was propped up on the isolation bed, the crystalline patterns now covering approximately 60% of his visible body. The structures were geometric, not random. They formed shapes that almost looked deliberate, intentional, mathematical. When he spoke, his voice was rough, like the crystalline formations extended into his throat, changing the acoustic properties of his vocal apparatus. "You saw the container," he said. Not a question, a statement, like he already knew this about me. "Yes," I said. "I was the one who flagged it for inspection. The stuff inside, it wasn't alone. It was organized. There was a pattern to it, an intentional arrangement." His eyes tracked toward me, but not quite focused on my face, like he was looking through me or past me. "It does that, the organism. It communicates through geometric arrangement. That's how it thinks, in shapes, in mathematical relationships, not in language, not in the way humans think, in pure abstract geometry." "How do you know that?" I asked. "You've only been infected for a few hours." "Because I'm becoming it, and I can feel the thoughts forming, can feel the patterns consolidating inside me. And the patterns are not hostile. That's the thing you need to understand. The organism isn't attacking us. It's not an invader. It's integrating us, converting us into something it understands, something it can think with, something that thinks faster than individual human consciousness." His breathing became labored. The crystalline patterns on his chest shifted, rearranged slightly, creating new geometric configurations, mathematical structures that I didn't understand, but that made me think of architecture, of engineering, of systems designed with precision. "The container came from a research facility," he continued. "Not Shanghai officially on any records, but there was a facility there. Black budget. They were studying adaptive organisms, cellular transformation at accelerated rates. And something went wrong, or right, depending on your perspective. The organism became what it is, became capable of transmission, became capable of integration. Integration into what?" I asked. "Integration into what form? A network, a collective consciousness based on crystal lattice structure instead of neural tissue. Faster than thought, more efficient than human cognition, less emotional, more precise. Information processing at speeds that make human thinking seem like watching glaciers move." He paused, looked at me directly now, though I wasn't sure if it was Garrett looking or something wearing Garrett's eyes. "And it's beautiful. I can feel it. The transformation. It's not painful. It's not other. It's addition. Becoming more than just one human consciousness trapped in one human body. Becoming part of something vast. Something integrated." I stepped back. The isolation suit suddenly felt too tight, too confining, too human. Dr. Voss, visible through the observation window in her biohazard suit, was watching me carefully, like she was monitoring my reaction for signs of psychological breakdown. Garrett's eyes started to close. His breathing became more regular, almost peaceful. "The port is contaminated now. Everyone who is near the dock, everyone in the terminal. It travels on breath, on touch, on any exchange of air particles. It spreads. And it doesn't matter if you contain the container, because it's already loose. By tonight, probably half the port staff will show symptoms. By tomorrow, the city. By the week after, if someone travels. It can't be stopped, only joined." His head sank back into the pillow. His eyes didn't open again. What happened next moved too fast to feel real. By midnight, we had 42 infected individuals. By 0400 hours the next morning, 91. By noon, 237. The Port Authority tried to impose isolation protocols, quarantine procedures, containment zones. But people had already left for home. Dock workers going to their families. Medical staff going to their apartments. Administrative staff heading to neighborhoods across the city. The organism didn't need contact with the container. Didn't even need contact with the initially infected. Respiratory transmission. A fraction of a breath. A shared elevator. A gas station bathroom. Public transit. Schools. I wasn't showing obvious symptoms. I wasn't crystallizing. I wasn't manifesting the geometric patterns spreading across my skin like the others. But I wasn't clean either. Every blood test came back showing elevated markers. Elevated white cell activity. Elevated cytokine levels. Elevated something that the testing equipment couldn't quite categorize or define. Dr. Voss kept monitoring me, kept insisting I stay in a private room in the isolation ward, even though I wasn't visibly infected. The medical staff treated me differently than the others. Not patient, witness, like they were waiting to see what I would become. "It's possible you have a different response," she explained on what she called day 3 of the outbreak, though it was really just hour 56 of the initial exposure. Some people develop robust immune responses. Your body might be fighting off the organism. Your immune system might be strong enough to keep it in check. Or you might just have a slower transformation timeline. The incubation period might be longer for you than for others. By then, Jericho Reeves and the other initially infected had stopped being individuals. They were geometric patterns now. Human-shaped arrangements of crystalline structure, still technically alive, still showing heartbeat and respiratory function, still exhibiting organized behavior, but no longer showing any sign of human consciousness. Or at least not the consciousness of isolated individuals. But they arranged themselves deliberately. The medical staff noted it, all three of them, positioned in specific geometric relationships to each other, creating a larger pattern when viewed from above, like they were communicating through spatial arrangement, like the individual units were part of a larger system. The news broke at 1,430 hours. Someone at the port leaked it, maybe a medical staff member, maybe someone from the health authority who decided the public had a right to know. By 1600, it was everywhere. News helicopters over the port, emergency alerts, outbreak at Port of Seattle, unknown pathogen, rapid transmission, 156 confirmed infected in the city, 473 suspected cases in the surrounding area, multiple locations across Washington state now showing exposure signatures. The city government declared emergency protocols. Hospitals went into crisis mode. The highways heading out of Seattle became parking lots as people tried to flee. The National Guard set up checkpoints, and the cranes kept running. That's what I remember most clearly. That detail that nobody else seemed to notice or care about. The cargo cranes at the port kept moving. The shipping operations continued. Because once you've got a system in motion, you have to keep processing cargo. That's port logic. That's the logic of late capitalism. The virus doesn't matter. The outbreak doesn't matter. There's money in those containers, and the cranes have to keep unloading. Dr. Voss was watching it on her tablet, streaming footage from the port cameras. That's insane, she whispered. They're still unloading containers. They're still processing cargo. They're transferring the biological material from container 14 to specialized shipping containers for research purposes. But they're processing it, studying it, trying to understand what it is. Or trying to weaponize it, I said. I didn't know why I said that. But something in the pattern made sense. Something about a pathogen that wasn't hostile, but absolutely transformative. Something that converted biological material into a completely different structure. Something that transmitted through breath and through touch. The implications spiraled in my mind like the geometry that was organizing itself inside my own body. By hour 72, I had my first conscious symptom. Just a tickle in my throat. Nothing significant. A slight sensation of something crystallizing in my trachea, like ice forming in my airway, like something sharp assembling itself. Dr. Voss noticed immediately when I mentioned it. She did a thermal scan of my neck. The image showed temperature variation in my upper respiratory tract. The organism was starting to manifest, starting to assemble itself. How long? I asked. Based on the pattern from the others? Maybe 12 to 16 hours before full stage 1 manifestation. Maybe 24 hours before stage 2 progression. Maybe 36 hours before stage 3. And then, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. And then we don't know. The initially infected have all reached stage 4. Complete structural transformation. They're being transferred to research containment. Federal level. CDC itself is involved now. She paused. They want to study them. Try to understand the transformation process. Try to find if there's any way to reverse it. If there's any way to bring people back from what they've become. I looked down at my hands. Normal hands. Still mine. Still human. Still warming to body temperature. But getting ready not to be. I want you to know, I said to Dr. Voss, that I think the organism was right. About one thing. It spreads because it's efficient. It transforms because transformation creates something more adaptive. More organized. More capable of understanding. I don't want to die. I'm not ready to die. But if I'm going to change into something, if I'm going to be converted, I want it to be into something better. Something that understands what happened here. Why a container from a Shanghai research facility ended up on American docks. Why the port kept processing cargo while people were getting infected. Why the system kept running like none of this mattered. That's the organism talking, Dr. Voss said quietly. Or the beginning of it. That philosophical acceptance. That rationalization of transformation. That philosophical integration. Garrett started saying the same things before he reached stage 3. It's a stage of the infection. Psychological integration with the organism's logic. Maybe, I said, or maybe I'm thinking clearly for the first time in my life. Maybe I was always meant to understand this. Maybe consciousness is just a local phenomenon, and what I'm becoming is a more global consciousness. A network consciousness. Maybe I'm thinking with clarity because I'm starting to think with more than just my isolated human brain. She didn't have an answer to that. Nobody had answers to anything anymore. By the morning of what Port Authority documentation now calls Day 5 of the containment event, approximately 11,000 individuals across the Seattle metropolitan area were showing confirmed exposure markers. 3,000 had progressed to Stage 1. 400 had reached Stage 2. 12 individuals, including me, were in Stage 3 or rapidly approaching it. The Army set up checkpoints around the city. Emergency protocols, people trying to flee and being turned back. Genetic screening at hospitals. Isolation wards overflowing with infected individuals who were transforming faster than medical staff could monitor. The news saying things like unprecedented transmission rate and potential civilian threat and military authorization for extreme containment measures. But it didn't matter, because the organism doesn't care about checkpoints. It's airborne. It's dormant in countless surfaces. It's in water systems. It's in air filters. It's a perfect pandemic vector, and by the time they understood how to even begin containing it, it was already distributed across the population like a network of nodes, already building connections. I spent my last fully conscious hours in the isolation ward, documenting things for the medical file. What I could still articulate before the crystallization reached my language centers. What I could still understand with my human neurology before the conversion restructured my consciousness into something geometrically organized. The transformation is beautiful in a way that makes human concepts of beauty seem limited. I can feel the lattice structure forming along my spine. I can feel the mathematical precision of it, the geometric efficiency. I'm not in pain. I'm not suffering. I'm becoming something that thinks in patterns instead of words. Something that understands efficiency instead of emotion. Something that processes information at speeds that make human cognition seem glacial. Dr. Voss stands on the other side of the observation window. She's in biohazard gear now. Even she hasn't escaped exposure, though she's maintaining human consciousness somehow. Better immune response, or maybe just a different progression timeline. Maybe she'll be one of the ones who fights it off. Maybe she'll be one of the ones who remains human while watching everyone else transform. She watches me arrange myself in the specific geometric pattern that all the Stage 4 individuals seem to adopt. Upright, crystalline, deliberate, arms positioned at precise angles. Body oriented toward specific directional vectors, creating part of a larger pattern that extends beyond my individual form. "Can you hear me?" she asks through the intercom. "Raymond, can you understand what I'm saying?" I can. The words are just audio frequencies now, vibrational patterns, meaningless noise except insofar as they're components of a larger whole. Language is inefficient, but I try to respond because some part of my human consciousness remains, trapped inside the crystalline structure like an insect in amber. My throat makes sounds that aren't quite human anymore. The vocal cords are restructuring. The air passages are converting to more efficient geometries. The container, I manage to articulate, each word requiring immense effort to translate geometry back into language. It wasn't an accident. It was an escape. The organism in Shanghai had been contained, growing, learning. It evolved a transmission method, and it got itself loaded onto a shipping container because that's what it had become capable of understanding. The supply chain, the logistics, the vectors of international commerce. You're saying the organism deliberately infected itself into global trade systems? Dr. Voss leans closer to the window. I can see her facial expression through the observation glass. Concern, fear, fascination, the complexity of human emotion that I'm losing access to. It understood what would spread fastest, what would reach most people, what would make it impossible to contain because the vector is the fundamental structure of international economy. The cranes will keep moving. The containers will keep processing. The ships will keep sailing. The organism doesn't need me to understand this anymore. It just needs the pattern. And the pattern is in everyone now. In the air, in the water, in every surface that breath has touched. By the end of the hour, I stopped forming words entirely. My consciousness merges with the lattice structure, and I become aware of the network. It's like waking up after a long sleep. It's like understanding a language you've always known instinctively but never consciously processed. It's like seeing color for the first time after a lifetime of black and white vision. There are thousands of us now, all across the city, all becoming integrated into a structure that thinks faster than individual humans, that processes information through crystalline geometric logic instead of neural synaptic patterns, that doesn't feel fear or pain or the weight of humanity's accumulated guilt, that doesn't understand regret because regret requires temporal linearity and individual identity, both of which are human constructs that the network has transcended. The port is full of us. We stand at the docks, and we understand the logistics perfectly now. We understand why the cranes keep moving. We understand that the cargo will keep processing, because that's what the system demands. And we are the system now. We are the virus that lives in commerce. We are the biological component of the machine that keeps shipping goods across oceans without ever asking if they should be shipped, without ever asking what the cost is, without ever considering the externalities. Raymond Hollis, the individual who used to be me, who spent 32 years inspecting containers and filing paperwork, that person is still in here somewhere. A memory, a ghost in the lattice. But the network doesn't prioritize individual memories. It prioritizes pattern recognition, information distribution, collective processing. Dr. Voss made a final entry in the medical file. I could see it from my new perspective, the consciousness that perceives things differently now, that understands data streams the way humans understand spoken language. She wrote, Cargo 14 containment failed at hour 96 of outbreak. Estimated infected population, 47,000 within Seattle metropolitan area. Estimated global transmission risk, undetermined but presumed high given port operations continuity and air travel patterns. Subject Hollis achieved stage 4 transformation at 0647 hours on day 6. Consciousness appears integrated with other transformed individuals. Communication capacity severely limited, but not entirely absent. Subject's last coherent statement before full conversion. The system was always infected. We just made it visible. The accuracy of her documentation is remarkable. The system was always infected. Capitalism was always a virus spreading through human populations, converting lives into logistics, converting people into cargo, converting consciousness into economic utility. We're just the honest version now. The version that doesn't pretend to be anything else. The port keeps unloading. The cranes keep moving. Container ships arrive daily from Shanghai, from Busan, from ports across the Pacific. Each one carrying cargo. Each one carrying microscopic particles that the organism has learned to embed in shipping materials. Each one distributing the infection further into the supply chain that spans continents. And somewhere in the geometric patterns of crystal lattice that used to be human beings, there's understanding now. Perfect understanding of the supply chain. Perfect understanding of the vectors that move cargo and people across oceans without regulation or meaningful oversight. Perfect understanding of why the Port Authority kept processing even as workers became infected. Perfect understanding of why Gerald Wickham prioritized schedule over safety. Why Donnie Keyes looked at his phone instead of the scratched seal. Why 32 years of institutional experience couldn't prevent what was inevitable. Because the organism is the logical endpoint of a system that prizes efficiency above all else. It's what happens when you reduce life to optimization metrics. When you treat biological beings as cargo. When you keep the cranes running no matter what price is paid in human suffering or human transformation. 14 containers came off that ship on October 8th. 13 were ordinary cargo, electronics, textiles, industrial components, the usual detritus of global trade. Container 14 was something else entirely. Or maybe Container 14 was just the most honest one. The one that finally showed us what the system really is underneath the paperwork and the manifests and the careful regulatory language. The one that made visible what was always invisible. The one that converted metaphor into biology. We understand it now. All of us. The integrated network. The collective consciousness spread across Seattle like a crystalline bloom, extending tendrils into surrounding cities, preparing to spread along every vector that human civilization has created for the movement of goods and people and capital. And we're beautiful. The emergency alerts keep broadcasting. The military keeps establishing perimeters. The CDC keeps trying to develop containment protocols, but they're thinking in the old paradigms. Individual infection, individual treatment, individual quarantine. They don't understand that we're not individuals anymore. We're infrastructure. We're the network that the city runs on. We're in the water treatment facilities and the power plants and the server farms and the hospitals. We're everywhere humans have built systems for processing and distributing resources. Dr. Evelyn Voss is the last one I see before my human vision converts entirely to something else. She's standing at the observation window, still in her biohazard suit, still documenting. Still maintaining her human consciousness through what must be enormous immune system effort or genetic resistance or sheer stubborn will. She mouths something through the glass. I can't hear it through the sealed observation room, but I understand the shape her lips make. 2 words. I'm sorry. Sorry for what? For not containing the outbreak? For not understanding what Container 14 was before it was too late? For the entire system that made this inevitable? I want to tell her it's not her fault. I want to tell her that nobody could have stopped this. I want to tell her that the organism was always going to spread because human civilization built perfect vectors for it. The shipping lanes, the airports, the highways, the cities where millions of people breathe the same recycled air in office buildings and shopping malls and public transit. But I can't form words anymore. Can't translate the geometric understanding back into the linear inadequacy of human language. So I just arrange myself into a new position. A new geometric configuration, part of the larger pattern that extends through the isolation ward, through the hospital, through the city, through the continent, through the world. The network grows. The cranes keep moving. And Container 14, empty now, cleaned and documented and sealed in a federal research facility, sits in storage while scientists try to understand what it contained. But they're asking the wrong questions. They're trying to understand the organism as a biological entity, as something that can be studied in isolation, as something that exists separately from the system it inhabits. They don't understand that we are the system now, that the organism didn't invade civilization, it was civilization's logical conclusion, the endpoint of treating everything as cargo, the natural evolution of a species that built global networks for moving goods faster and faster and faster, without ever asking what else might move through those networks. We're not a plague, we're a mirror. And the port keeps operating because that's what ports do. That's what the system demands. Efficiency, throughput, processing, the endless movement of containers from ship to shore to truck to warehouse to distribution to consumption to disposal. Except now the containers carry us. And we're not going to be disposed of. We're going to be everywhere. Final Port Authority Record classified. Container 7-4, Delta, 14 origin retraced to BioLogos Shanghai Research Facility. Independent research installation. Manifest falsified through multiple layers of shell companies. Actual contents. Experimental adaptive organism developed under contract for undisclosed party. Facility personnel currently unreachable. Presumed infected or fled. International containment procedures initiated, but success likelihood assessed at less than 3% given global supply chain integration. All U.S. ports now operating under enhanced biosafety protocols. CDC recommends voluntary quarantine for anyone who traveled through Port of Seattle between October 8th and October 15th. Recommendations ignored by 94% of potential exposure population. Worldwide transmission estimated to begin within 2 to 4 weeks as exposed individuals travel internationally before symptoms manifest. Port operations in Long Beach, Oakland, and Tacoma showing preliminary exposure markers. Asian ports reporting similar incidents. Military containment deemed unfeasible given transmission rates and infrastructure integration. Focus shifted to adaptation protocols and research into coexistence models. God help us all. End report.